I came up with the idea for the long ride just a few days ago. My friends and I had met up on Friday evening to hang out, share some stories and, of course, to have a few beers. Before long, I ended up completely plastered. As I sat there, trying my best not to fall out of my chair, my friend said something that got the gears in my brain turning, albeit slowly.
I'm sure I can do it,
I blurted out drunkenly. Do what? One of my friends, Alex, asked me.
What that punchy guy did. The thing Derek just mentioned about, riding the subway back and forth. It's pinch on, dude,
Derek corrected me with a sigh.
And he didn't do it. He just wrote about it in one of his books. Yeah, whatever, but I'm sure I can do it too. And I can do it for an entire week.
I obnoxiously slurred.
What the hell are you even talking about? Riding the tram back and forth, without getting off, I said. Why would you even do that? Because I fucking can. This has got to be the dumbest shit you have ever come up with, Derek mumbled.
And that is how it started. The next thing, I woke up with a head-splitting headache and utterly hungover. But, of course, I remembered what I had said. And of course, I was set on doing it. When I hit up my friends via WhatsApp and told them I was actually going ahead with this, they were less than enthusiastic and didn't even seem to care. I was, however, and I spent the rest of the weekend getting ready for the long ride. I was going to spend an entire week on the tram without getting off. Well, almost getting off, I thought, and I came up with a simple set of rules, which I promptly shared with my friends in a newly created WhatsApp group. Rule number 1 was, of course, no getting off the tram, not to go home, not to get supplies. The only exception to this was to go to the toilet, which I only allowed myself to do at one specific station. I also told my friends that I would update them with a short video every hour so they would know that I was still on the tram. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how right my friends were. This really was the dumbest thing I'd ever come up with. Yet, I was also very, very excited about what might happen. But after what happened today, after what I saw, and what else I might see over the course of this week, I decided to share this journey with you guys. Early this morning, at around 8 a.m, I entered my tram line of choice, line number 4. It was by far the single longest line, going from one end of the city all the way to the other. A single, one-way trip, lasting roughly an hour and a half. I also made sure to come prepared, and I stocked up on pretty much anything I might need. I'd gotten my Kindle ready, a couple of books, 3 fully charged power banks, enough food and water to, hopefully, last me a week, and a single change of clothes just in case. All of this I had put away in a gigantic camping backpack half the size of a person. In the early morning, the city's trams are a crowded hell, filled to the brim with people going to work and students on their way to uni. Having been lucky enough, I found myself a seat and settled in with my giant backpack. I then put in my headphones and blasted music into my ears to drown out the general hustle and bustle around me. That morning, nothing strange happened, and I was quite happy when the tram grew emptier and more people got off until only about a dozen remained. For the first time in a long while, I actually took the time to look at my surroundings, the city and other people on the tram. Usually I would be occupied with my phone or my Kindle. The first few hours of the long ride went by relatively uneventfully. The only thing of note that happened was that an older lady sat down near me when I took out one of my many sandwiches. She ranted on and on about how I was not allowed to eat on the tram, and she pointed at a row of prohibition signs above us. I simply ignored her and continued eating with a slight grin on my face. Before long, she left me be, walking away shaking her head and cursing about how young people don't know manners anymore. She was on the tram for about another half hour, and for the entire duration, she stared daggers at me. Although, she at least didn't follow through on her promise to inform the driver and have me kicked off. That would have been a rather anticlimactic ending to the long ride, I thought, laughing to myself. The first truly strange thing, and the reason I'm posting this, happened that afternoon. Even now though, as I'm typing this out, I'm not exactly sure what I saw. In the afternoon, the tram filled up with people once more. Some, students from the nearby uni. Others, people getting off work and, of course, children on their way home after a long day at school. One group in particular caught my interest. It was a group comprising of 7 kids, a loud group. They were laughing, yelling at each other, blasting music and jumping around. I hated them. As I watched them with growing disdain, I noticed that 2 of them looked exactly the same. Brothers, I reasoned, most likely twins. The behavior of these 2, however, that could not have been more different. One of them was as energetic as the rest, while the other just stood there, not moving at all, watching the rest, who seemed to ignore him entirely. At first, I thought nothing of this, but the longer I watched him, the stranger this whole thing felt. Then, slowly, ever so slowly, this child's face grew from a dejected, uninterested look into a grin, an almost hungry grin, one directed at his brother. This went on for almost 15 minutes. His friends never noticed his weird behavior, and similarly, the child never noticed me staring. As much as I told myself he was just a child being a child, I couldn't help but find the entire situation weird, surreal even. That face-splitting grin, it wasn't normal. This was not what a child should look like. Hell, even could look like. I leaned forward, took out my phone, and I was about to take a picture when the tram came to a halt. Amongst the general bustle, I lost track of the kids who left the tram amongst a multitude of other people. Eventually, I saw them again, outside at the station. I noticed something right away. Now, there were only 6 of them, not 7. One of the brothers, the twins, he was gone. The other, he just stood out there, next to his group of friends, not doing anything. A second later, the tram doors closed. In that instant, the kid's head jerked in my direction. His eyes were wide, his face still distorted by that same twisted grin, and he was staring right at me, and only me. And then he opened his mouth, wider than what should be possible, and he jumped forward as if to throw himself through the glass. I cringed back in terror, away from the window, almost toppling over my backpack and sending a handful of supplies over the floor of the tram. Within moments, and thanks to a few helpful other passengers, I was quick to pick everything back up. When I looked back up, however, this kid was gone and was now hurrying after his group of friends, seemingly without a care in the world. Even now, I don't know what to make of this. I told myself that he was just being a kid, just being stupid after he'd noticed me staring at him. That face though, that mouth. The thing that has me most worried though was the number of kids. I knew that there had been 7 kids before, yet only 6 kids got off. For 10 long minutes, I scanned the interior of the tram, trying to find this missing kid and to see if he'd stayed behind on his own. Yet, there was not a single hint of him. He seemed to have completely vanished. The general hustle and bustle of the day soon evened out as afternoon turned into evening. Then, it picked up once more when people set out to hit the bars or meet up with friends. I nodded off about 11 in the evening. I was jerked awake long past 2 in the morning when I was almost ripped out of my seat. When I opened my eyes, I found myself face to face with some arsehole who'd tried to take a hold of my backpack. Yet, I was no fool. Before I'd gone to sleep, I'd made sure to carefully wrap the backpack strap around my arm. For a few seconds, the guy just stared at me, a dumbfounded look on his face, before he realized what was going on. A moment later, when the tram came to a stop, he rushed away outside. I could only stare at him. This arsehole had just tried to steal my shit. After he was gone, I checked the backpack's contents to make sure none of them were gone. And then, I took out my phone and I began typing this all out. Now, I'm just sitting here, trying to catch some sleep. If I witness any other strange things, or something else of interest happens, I'll keep you all updated. Well, the second day of my little journey is over. The one I came to call the long ride. And boy, do I have a few things to tell you. Things took a turn for the worse, but more on that later. After sitting in a tram for over 24 hours, I realized just how beautiful my city is. It's breathtaking, full of old architecture, nice little parks, and a riverside panorama view few other cities can compare to. That morning, I actually took my very first toilet break. I don't know how I lasted that long, but let me tell you, the moment I went, it was heaven. The early hours of the day went by as usual. Once again, the tram was overcrowded, and a few times I noticed people staring at me angrily for not getting off my seat or at least moving my giant backpack. Well, tough luck. This row is my home for this entire week. Before you ask, yes, I specifically planned out where I would sit. Second tram car, third row from the back. The first interesting thing to happen that day was an encounter with an older man. He must have entered the tram between 9 and 10 in the morning. I only remember because I had just taken another short video for my friends, and when I looked back up from the phone, there he was, sitting only a few rows ahead of me. It seemed almost as if he'd just appeared out of nowhere. Must have snuck in at the last stop, I reasoned. Strangely enough, he just sat there as the tram continued on to the end of the line station, and he remained seated as the tram turned around and went back the other way where it came from. I couldn't help but smile a bit. However, I was also a bit confused. Were there other people who did the same dumb thing I did? Just riding the tram back and forth for no reason? Well, who knows? Maybe he's just a bored old man with nothing to do. Maybe he just enjoys tram rides or the scenery. Or hell, maybe he just doesn't mind getting on the tram a bit earlier and taking a brief detour before reaching his destination. I tried to not be bothered by him, but whenever I looked up from my book, he was still there, going back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth, right along with me. As I munched on another sandwich and some crackers, I couldn't help but stare at the back of his head. It was about 2 in the afternoon, and by now, he must have been on the tram for at least 4 hours. What the hell was he doing? I'm not going to lie. He was beginning to unnerve me a bit. A few minutes later, he got up, and I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he must be about to get off. Instead, he turned around, came right up to me, and took a seat. He turned his bald head towards me, and I noticed that something was wrong with him. His eyes, they looked glassy, almost hazy. The weirdest part, however, was this guy's outfit. It just didn't fit. Not on his body, I mean, but it didn't fit in the 21st century. It reminded me of something I'd once seen in an old family photo album, a style popular multiple decades ago.
Interesting to see someone here for as long as me,
he finally said. I just stared at him, surprised by the gentle, well-meaning tone of his voice. Oh yeah, it's, I guess, a dare between friends, you know, to see how long I can last.
Young people these days,
he mused.
But I suppose I sure did my share of stupid things back in my days.
How come you're on so long yourself? Are you enjoying the ride? The scenery? He was quiet now, and for a few moments, he just stared outside, watching the city pass by.
Well, you aren't wrong, young man. I've been on here for quite some time. Longer than I'd ever have guessed. But it's interesting to see things change. New lines, new stations. Feels like just yesterday that I rode on line 5 to the main station.
What he just said made no sense. There was no line 5. Sure, there had been one, but it was discontinued over 2 decades ago. Wasn't line 5 discontinued?
Yes, you're right. But once you've been here for as long as me, you sometimes forget these types of things.
What? What do you mean? How long have you been here? For some reason, I suddenly felt cold. Something didn't add up. Not just his hazy eyes or his outfit, but the things he said.
Much too long, young man. That's just how it is for some of us. We can ride on, but we'll never reach our destination.
What the hell's that supposed to mean?
You should be careful, young man. This place, like any others, has its dangers, especially for those who stay on for too long.
He said, getting up now. I said nothing back. I could only watch as he walked on and entered the tramcar ahead of me. Then, for only a single second, what I saw changed. It was only for the blink of an eye, but it made me cringe in terror, and I felt myself break into a cold sweat. What had been a nicely dressed older man now appeared as a mangled, twisted corpse. Its upper body was caved in, almost torn apart. Its arms were dangling at its side, broken entirely. The worst, however, were this thing's legs. They were nothing but a mass of ground flesh and bone. Then it was over, and once again, I saw nothing but an old man. He turned to me, a well-knowing, sad look on his face, before he gave me a little nod, as if to say, "Be careful." Right at that moment, my phone vibrated, notifying me about a new message. I jerked and almost dropped it before I turned back towards the old man. Or rather, where he had been. He was gone now. I scanned the car ahead of me, then behind me, but I saw nothing. He had just vanished. I couldn't help but shiver. What the hell had just happened? I thought about the mangled, twisted version of him I had seen, the things he had talked about. Had I just been visited by a spirit? For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. In the afternoon, the tram filled up again, then emptied out again before the process repeated itself in the evening. As it turned late, I settled back into my seat, put on some music, and prepared myself for another couple of hours rest. Hopefully a few more than yesterday. As I sat there, I watched the few other late-night passengers on the tram with me. In my mind, I gave them names and made up stories about them. Right there, a few seats ahead of me, sat Jenny, a young woman in her mid-20s who was on her way home after a late-night shift at the nursing home. Further ahead sat old Rupert, a bachelor in his early 60s who'd just enjoyed a performance at the State Theatre along with a group of friends. It was strange, but I almost felt a connection with these people, as if they were my people, the citizens of Tramonia, a nation comprising of nothing but this one lone tram, going back and forth forever. A few minutes later, a group of guys got on, guys who were clearly drunk. They were a loud, rowdy bunch, walking up and down the tramcar and howling obscenities, dangling from handrails like the idiots they were. Almost unconsciously, I felt myself drawn to them, and I couldn't help but watch. They were breaking the laws of Tramonia, I thought, and they would need to be punished. As I sat there, half nodding off, staring at them, I tried to come up with ideas on how Tramonia would handle crime and how those who committed them would be punished. I didn't realize that one of them had long noticed me staring at him. His expression was not normal. not one of mild curiosity. No, he looked pissed, or at least up for trouble.
"The fuck are you staring at, arsehole?"
he called out to me. I jerked up in my seat, averting my eyes, but I could already hear them coming my way. Shit, now I'd done it.
"Yeah, bro, what's up?"
One of them blurted out as he sat down in front of me. I didn't say a thing, and instead, I just tried my best to ignore them.
"Hey, we're talking to you."
His friend spat at me. Nothing, just on my way home, I mumbled. Oh yeah, is that so? The one in front of me said in a sing-song kind of voice. I gave him another yeah, and tried my best to stare out the window. This promptly landed me a slap against the back of the head.
"What the fuck are you—"
I couldn't even finish that sentence before one of them grabbed me by the throat, raising his fist.
"You think you can fuck with us, arsehole?"
Right at that moment, the driver's voice could be heard via the intercom, telling them to knock it off. The guys stared at each other in surprise, but they didn't move, nor did they release me. A second announcement by the driver followed soon after, this one more serious. He assured them that he was ready to stop the tram here and now and call the cops should they not back off immediately. Finally, I was released, and after throwing me another set of insults, the three of them just walked away. A few stations later, they thankfully got off the tram for good, but not without sending me a few more angry glances. When we pulled into the end of the line station, a place where trams would occasionally power down during the late hours of the night, the driver approached me.
Hey there. Not to bother you, but I've noticed you've been on the tram for quite a while. What exactly are you up to?"
Well, I'm trying to get home, but...
"You've been trying to get home for the past 5 hours?"
Shit. He got me. Alright. No. To be honest, it's a bet, I started, giving him an embarrassed little laugh. He raised his eyebrows, waiting for me to continue. I told my friends I'd be able to stay on the tram for an entire week without getting off it. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he furrowed his brow before he spoke again.
"That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard,"
he said, shaking his head. Yeah, it really is, I agreed.
"Well, it's not like I can kick you off for something like this. You got a ticket on you, right?"
Sure thing. Got myself a weekly pass, just for the long ride. Once more, he raised his eyebrows, and I quickly told him that that was the name I came up with for this thing.
"Well, it's dumb. Really friggin' dumb. But as long as you don't cause any trouble, that's it. Just try to stay clear of guys like the ones before."
Sure thing, boss. With that, the conversation was over, and the driver went outside to have a smoke or two. About half an hour later, the tram started up again, and the ride continued. Well, that's day number 2, guys. See you all tomorrow. After last night's encounter with the group of thugs, I was quite shaken. I didn't know, however, what day 3 would hold in store for me. I still kept to my people watching, and I still made up stories about my few lonely companions during the quieter hours. Just not in an overly obvious or annoying way. That's how I came to notice a certain woman. She was middle-aged, wore a long skirt and blue woolen sweater, and she kept her hair tied in a ponytail. At first glance, there was nothing wrong with her or wrong with her behaviour. She was just another normal passenger, getting on the tram at point A and getting off at point B. Things turned strange, however, when I noticed her entering the tram again at a later station further along the line. At first, I thought I was mistaken and that my eyes were playing tricks on me. This was a big city. Many people lived here, and I was sure that some of them were bound to look similar. Yet, as I watched her, I noticed the same skirt, the same sweater, and the same ponytail. This was, without a doubt, the same person. This was impossible. How in the hell had she got here within 10 minutes, a good 3 kilometers from where she'd gotten off? I couldn't help but shiver as I watched her getting off again a few stations later, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when she re-entered the tram yet again after a good 15. In total, she entered that tram on 7 entirely different locations throughout the city in about an hour and a half. She was, however, not the only one. There were others like her, almost a dozen in total. One was an older man, about 50 years of age to guess. He wore a suit and he carried a briefcase, and I saw him a total of 5 times. Some were children, just laughing children who entered the tram on their own and then left it and then entered it again just a few stations later. These people, they only ever appeared when the tram was empty or almost empty. At least, that's when I caught sight of them. Whenever I did, I would feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Yet, they did nothing strange. Never looked at me, never approached me. They just rode the tram. At one point, my eyes met those of an older woman during her 4th iteration, as I came to call it. But she didn't even bat an eye and gave me no attention at all. Still, this was one of the most unsettling things I'd noticed so far, and I tried my best to stay clear of these people. Another strange passenger was a young man dressed entirely in black. I first noticed him in the early evening hours. He entered the tram and stayed on it, just like I did. For long hours, he just sat there in the same seat. At times, he would stare outside, but at others, he would just watch the people around him, and occasionally, I even found him staring my way. When he did, an unexplainable wave of fear washed over me, and I couldn't help but squirm in my seat. He gave me the feeling of being trapped like an animal, of being prey. The reason was his face. He wasn't merely staring, but grinning. Always grinning. This comically wide grin that almost divided his face. He wasn't grinning at anyone, however. Instead, he just seemed to grin to himself. It was the strangest thing. At one point, I watched as he leaned forward, pushing his face so close to the woman sitting next to him that it almost touched hers. I noticed how uncomfortable she became, but she never spoke up. She just sat there, squirming in her seat nervously, almost as if she didn't actually see the guy. She was not his only victim. He did the same to countless other passengers, and not a single one called him out on this behavior. The longer this went on, the longer I watched what he was doing, the more often I found him staring at me. As much as I told myself to ignore this, to not attract attention, I just couldn't. I was driven by the strangest sense of curiosity. This guy, whoever he was, whatever he was just wrong. It was shortly past midnight when I noticed the change. For the first time, the guy was not grinning to himself anymore. No, now he was grinning right at me. I saw how he leaned forward in his seat, his hands next to him, as if he was about to push himself upward at any moment. I tried my best to stare outside, to ignore him, but whenever I took a sideways glance, he was still there, still grinning at me. And each time, his grin seemed to have grown wider. Eventually, when I couldn't take it anymore, I was about to get up to leave my trusty row of seats and flee to the back of the tram. I stopped. The strangest of feelings washed over me, one that told me in no uncertain terms to stay right where I was. Somehow, I knew that if I were to get up right now, he would get me. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I knew. I saw the anticipation on his face, the way his feet shuffled over the ground, and his posture, ready to pounce on me the moment I got up. Finally, after about half an hour of this game of sitting duck, he just got up and left the tram. Outside, he simply walked off without so much as looking back at me. Even now, I've got no clue what the hell was wrong with that guy. Maybe it was just some arsehole trying to mess with me. But somehow, I feel he was something far worse. Yet, as terrifying as this half-hour encounter was, it would not be the most terrifying thing I'd witness on day 3. It was later that night, as I sat in my seat, unable to fall asleep, that I noticed the change in scenery. I told myself it was because it was nighttime and because of the darkness. But you see, I've ridden this damn tram for 2.5 days now. I knew the areas it passed through. Hell, I knew what buildings were at what station. Station 17, a giant mall. Station 44, an old hardware store, and so on. Yet, that night, I occasionally saw new areas. Areas that were just different. At one point, the tram passed through a street which was lined by nothing but giant, derelict tower blocks. Before long, even the tram tracks themselves seemed to deteriorate. The tram rambled on through this forlorn area, shaking slightly, without ever stopping at any station. We must have been there for at least 10 minutes without ever stopping, which I know is impossible. On the way back, we never passed that area again. It was as if it never existed. At other times, the tram took bends and went around corners that shouldn't be there, and it drove through constricted, half-hidden streets and alleys that seemed almost too small for it to pass. Whenever we reached one of these strange places, I couldn't help but stare outside, strangely curious about them. Some streets were so narrow, the tram was only a few inches away from the walls of the buildings, allowing me to catch glances through open doors and windows. What I saw was utterly surreal, and it made me question if I was even awake, or if all of this was nothing but a weird dream conjured up by 2 nights of barely catching any sleep and perpetually being stuck in a tram. In one window, I was greeted by 4 people. They weren't just inside their apartment, but they were leaning out of the window, their faces almost pressed against the passing tram. Their eyes were empty, their faces without any emotion. Yet, when they were right beside me, I couldn't help but inch away from the tram's windows, afraid that they might do something. In another window, one belonging to a tiny, inconspicuous building, I saw a giant hall. It seemed without end. I saw only the floor, but no walls or ceiling. It just continued on, seemingly endlessly, and it was much, much too large for the building that contained it. Yet from the far back, off in the darkness of the most distant parts of that hall, I thought I saw eyes watching me. Eventually, the tram approached a station in one such area, and it came to a halt. Outside, I saw a strange figure. At first, I thought it was just a drunk person or maybe someone disabled, given their strange posture. But then my eyes adjusted, and I realized something was entirely wrong with that figure. It was some sort of deformed thing. Its limbs, they were bent at strange angles. It seemed to have too many joints inside them, and they sprouted from places that they just shouldn't. As the tram sat there, it cocked its head slightly in my direction. Then, its head pushed forward, its neck stretching further and further, much further than should be possible. Sweat broke out all over my body as I found the ghastly creature measuring me up and down. This time, it wasn't just fear that came over me, but full-on panic. My body started shaking uncontrollably, and I had to cling to the seat in front of me to somehow keep the panic at bay, to not freak out completely at this surreal sight outside. Slowly, this thing moved. It approached the tram door on its long, spider-like limbs, and I saw it entering the tram, coming for me. As it took these few select steps, I hoped, prayed that it would stay where it was. I think in the state that I was in, I spoke, maybe yelled those words repeatedly through the empty tram, until thankfully the doors closed and we left this waking nightmare behind. For the next few minutes, I just sat in my seat, my eyes closed, my knees down below my chin, and rocking back and forth like a scared little child. Eventually, when I opened my eyes again, All was normal, and the tram continued on its route and did so for the rest of the night. By now, it's early morning. I've not been able to sleep yet. I couldn't. Whenever I was about to doze off, I was afraid that I would end up at some unfamiliar, surreal location again. And this time, the creature would actually get in. Instead, I spent the last hour typing this all out to calm myself down. To be honest, I thought about giving up right there and then, to just get off and call it quits after what happened. But then I thought about it. I was on day 3. On day freaking 3. If I stopped now, my friends would never let it go. Above all that, however, as scary as these experiences were, they were also strangely fascinating. If I'd got off now, I'd probably regret it, forever wondering what else I might have seen on the long ride. So, I guess I'll keep going for a while longer. See you all tomorrow. Greetings, everyone. Day 4 is officially over, and it was a strange one to say the least. It was, however, similarly terrifying as the prior day, for various reasons. As I said, I had not slept, and even after I'd typed out the previous day's events, I was not able to. Before long, the first people on their way to work entered the tram, and I damn well knew I wouldn't get the chance to catch any sleep, at least not for the next hour or two. And so, before things grew too crowded, I set out for another toilet break. Also, I had to change my clothes. I might be a bit of a weirdo or, hell, even an idiot for doing this long ride, but I'd prefer not to look and smell like a hobo while doing it. It didn't take long, and once I'd pushed my used clothes back to the bottom of my backpack, I set out for the tram again. Needless to say, it was packed by this point, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. Once the tram approached the city's outskirts, I could finally return to my trusty row of seats. Once there, I put in my headphones, turned on some lo-fi chill mix, and settled down for some sleep. I guess I really was exhausted, because I promptly slept through the rest of the morning and almost the entire early afternoon. When I woke up, I had a stiff neck and a painfully twisted back. Those damn tram seats, they were not comfortable at all, and I cursed at myself for not investing in a travel pillow. It must have been around 4 in the morning, after another one of my short, hourly updates, when my friend Derek hit me up. He asked me if I was messing with them by posting old videos, or if I really was still at it. I assured him I was. After all, I told him, I set out to do this for an entire week. I mentioned, however, that I'd see how it goes, given certain things that have happened. When he asked me what that meant, I thought about telling him about what I'd seen last night, but I knew there was no way he would believe that. He said he was out in the city right now, and he asked when I would pass our city's central mall. After a quick check, I told him I'd be there in about an hour. He was quick to tell me that he would join me for a couple of stations and see how I was holding up. When he said this, I got an idea. Sure, I still had some sandwiches left, but to be honest, I was sick and tired of the same ham and cheese ones by now. So I asked Derek if he could get me some supplies. He told me to just get off the damn tram and get them myself, but I told him that would be breaking the rules. I then offered to pay him double for anything he'd bring me. We ended up exchanging a few more messages before he yielded and said he would do it. I thanked him profusely before giving him the time my tram would be arriving at the mall station. And wouldn't you know it, there he was, holding 2 shopping bags in his hands. He noticed me the moment the tram arrived and sat down in the row in front of me.
You know you're a freaking idiot, right?
Derek said, laughing.
You're really set on doing this an entire week? Why?
I shrugged. Made it halfway already. Why call it quits now?
This really is the dumbest thing you've ever done. Also, you look like shit, dude.
Can't sleep for shit on a tram, you know.
Well, no shit, idiot,
he said, shaking his head before he handed me the grocery bags. The first bag contained an assortment of snacks, some canned food, and even a few vegetables. When he handed me the second one, my eyes lit up. It was full of cans too, but the best kind of cans, beer. When I stared at him, he gave me a shrug.
Thought you'd want to have a drink every once in a while.
Sure do, man, sure do. After the shit I've seen. He raised his eyebrows at this, but I gave him a dismissive gesture. It's nothing.
Well, I gotta go, dude. Still got a ton of things to do, and not everyone can just sit around doing stupid shit all day. You know, some of us have got jobs and all,
he said, giving me a wink. Yeah, whatever, man, I said, laughing. I gave him the finger. He left at the next station and I was all on my own again. Gotta say, it felt damn good to actually talk to someone. Most of this long ride, it's pretty damn boring. I guess today would be slightly different though, I thought, as I pulled out the first of many beer cans. It was late in the afternoon, so I might as well have some fun. Now, there is a rule against getting plastered on the tram, and technically against drinking at all, but no one really cares to enforce it. So cheers, and bottoms up. I did do my best to be as inconspicuous as possible, but still, I noticed a few glances from people here and there, especially the hard-working, productive members of society, those on their way home from work who couldn't help but frown at the idiot happily drinking his beer at 5 in the afternoon. Yeah, I felt a bit guilty. As the evening progressed and I got drunker and drunker, I noticed strange things again. Same as the day before, I noticed the same people getting on and off the tram at various stations, seemingly at impossible intervals. Some of them I had seen before, others I had not. They all creeped me out, even in my drunken state. The tram also passed weird places again. It felt almost as if the longer I was on, the more consecutive hours I spent huddled in the same place, the more my reality seemed to waver, the more surreal it became. The first one was a giant playground, one much bigger than any other I'd seen before. The tram rode past it for almost an entire minute. I saw a giant steel climbing frame, one that rose high into the sky, and I saw an entire small town comprising of nothing but wooden forts, ladders and slides. It was nothing short of surreal. Even stranger though, even now, in the dark of the night, the place was still populated by a multitude of kids. A shiver went down my spine as I watched the goings-on out there. I was more than relieved when we finally left that place behind. I saw the next unreal location, or unlocation, as I came to call them, about an hour later. The tram made its way through the alternative part of town, rode past bars and clubs, before eventually it approached a building I had never seen before. The tram rode towards it before it began sneaking around the place. Holding my can of beer, I stared at it in fascination. The place was exclusively lit by red lights, and it was covered in an assortment of signs proclaiming it to be the destination of dreams, the place to be for the night. And above it all, the name Club Red sprouted from the wall in giant neon letters. The entire building was filled to the brim with people, even on a Thursday evening. As we rode past it, I could hear music, but not just any music. It was this strangely warped, droning type of music, one you might call psychedelic. But it almost felt too random for that. It was nothing but an assortment of sounds, something trying to have a melody, but somehow was not able to get it quite right. As I continued staring at the building, my eyes began to hurt. At first, I thought it was this red light, but the longer I focused on it, I realized it was the building itself. Things just didn't add up. I don't know how to explain this, but the layout, it just didn't make sense. I stared at the windows, one after another, but there were too many to fit on the front of the building. It was the strangest sensation. Imagine for a moment a building whose ground floor comprises nothing but 4 giant windows. Now, imagine the floor above has 7 windows of exactly the same size and equally spaced as the ones below. It shouldn't work. It should be impossible. Yet there they were, right in front of me. It was the strangest optical illusion that I had ever come upon. And when I saw it, my brain, it refused to handle it. It couldn't understand this warping of the laws of physics. In every one of these windows, I saw people. They were pushing and shoving against one another. Some were dancing, others leaning outward, and here and there, I even saw some sitting on the windowsills. This building's size, too, it made no sense. It wasn't big, nothing more than a handful of floors. At least, I thought so at first. The moment we were closer, and I stared upward, I could always find yet another floor above the one I was looking at. Each one of them, they became more and more surreal, bigger, and covered in more details, sprouting more windows. I even saw balconies, bridges connecting different parts of the building, and staircases that snaked around the building's outer walls, leading up and down, in and out. It was an amalgamation of architectural impossibilities. The people too, as well as what they were doing, became stranger the longer I watched. At first, it seemed to be normal people, just partying as usual. But then, I saw strange figures doing it right there in front of the windows or on balconies. Their forms as twisted as the building itself. At one point, I even saw what I assumed to be some sort of ghastly ritual or sacrifice. Finally, I came upon rows and rows of seats chiseled in the building's front, reminding me of a concert hall or a stadium. It was packed to the brim with people, distorted people. They were all watching the street below, watching the tram, and maybe watching me. They seemed to go crazy about it, applauding, laughing and pointing as we rode by. Each time we rounded a corner, I thought we'd be done and would finally leave this impossibility of a building behind. But we didn't. At first, I thought we must have been circling it, but each corner greeted me with yet another part of it. Each one stranger than the last, and in each one, more twisted and deprived things were happening. Eventually, I just couldn't handle it anymore. My head was hurting too much. I turned and I watched the other side of the street. All the while, the building's dim red light still flooding the tram. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was over. The red light was gone, the music was gone, and the tram continued on its normal course. I turned around and stared back, but all I saw was a long, straight road, one that led through the city's alternative area. All I saw were the same well-known clubs and bars. I know I should have been unsettled. I know I should have been freaking out. But somehow, I had become used to the strangeness of these unlocations. Or maybe I was just too drunk. A few minutes later, I took out my phone and looked for a place called Club Red. But I already knew what I'd find. Nothing. There was no sign of any such club ever having existed in my city. And to be honest, I was more than happy about that. Finally, I settled down in my seat, turned up my music, and continued my beer before drifting off to sleep. When I woke up, I felt slightly hungover, but still pleasantly buzzed. My neck was in terrible pain again. I cursed and rubbed it for a good minute before I shrugged and decided to have another beer. Who knows, maybe it'd help me go back to sleep again. It was only when I opened the can that I realized the tram, it was not empty anymore. No, it was packed. As if this was not strange enough, the tram was completely quiet. No one was speaking. No one was moving. Everyone was just sitting in their seats, unmoving and staring straight ahead. I knew instantly that something was wrong. Despite feeling cold, sweat broke out all over my body. For a moment, I just sat there, trying to hide my presence. But then, drunken curiosity won over fear. I turned my head to look at the person sitting in the row next to mine. What I saw made me freeze. Not normal. This was not a normal person. What I saw was a face that was undescriptive. It looked almost like a blank slate, as if someone had forgotten to add in all the characteristics and details that make someone a human being. Even though this person was only a meter away from me, I couldn't tell if they were a man or a woman, or if they were human at all. My drunken eyes, they wandered over the rest of the passengers near me, and I realized something. They were all the same. All of them were empty, for lack of a better word. Even in my drunken state, even though I downed about 9 beers over the course of the night, fear washed over me. Stone cold fear. Seeing these things outside was one thing. You felt strangely safe inside the tram, protected by its mighty steel chassis. But now it was inside with me. I felt very vulnerable and very, very afraid. I began to shudder, and I had to will myself to be quiet, to not move. What the fuck even were these things? Why were they in here? Once more, my eyes darted around, but then I told myself to stop. Do nothing. Just sit here. Just wait until they are all gone, or they get off the tram. Don't let them notice you. If they do, if they realize that you are here, they might... No, stop. Calm down. I put one of my hands on my knees to stop my leg from shaking. With the other one, I clutched onto my beer like a safety anchor. I just continued drinking, or tried the best I could. Then I turned to look outside, to watch my city pass by. To be honest, I expected to find another unlocation outside, and that I'd end up at yet another different place, the place that these things belonged to. This time, however, the outside was just empty. There was no city at all. All I saw was undescriptive ground. It was as empty as all the people around me. Another undescriptive blank slate. Where the hell was I? How did I end up in a place like this? When I saw the tram approaching a tunnel, I started shaking again. At this point, I almost lost it and freaked the hell out. This didn't feel like the other unlocations before. This felt different. So far, there was one thing that had never changed. The tram was always outdoors, no matter how much its surroundings had changed. But now, I wondered if this was the end. If this tunnel would just swallow me up to never return. I cursed at myself to stop once more, to just go back to sleep or wait until morning. And yet, I could not. All I could do was to watch as the tunnel's dark, dilapidated walls passed by me. Then, after a few long minutes, the tram left the tunnel behind, and we arrived at a station, if you can call it that. It was a quiet, unrefined place. There were no lights, no details, no maps or departure schedule. It was nothing more than a single, undescriptive platform. Yet the moment the tram stopped and opened its doors, all of these strange, undescriptive, empty people got to their feet and in unison filed out of the tram. After only a minute, I was alone. I stared outside and I just watched as they walked away and vanished into the darkness of the night. It wasn't long before the tram's driver, a different one than the one I'd spoken to before, approached me. He hurried through the tram's cars, his face distorted by a mixture of fear and confusion.
"We've made it, sir,"
he brought out in a shaken voice.
"This is the end. You've got to get off. You've reached your destination."
For a moment, I just stared at him. Then, towards the tram doors, into the darkness, the undescriptive plane outside, and I shivered. No, I can't. I've got to get back to the city. Whatever this place is, I don't belong here. When he heard my voice, the man stumbled back. Then he measured me, up and down, saw my backpack and the can of beer I was holding. A few seconds later, he just nodded, and without another word, he headed back to the driver's cabin. We stayed at this strange station for a while longer. I could feel the driver watching me via the tram's security camera this entire time. I don't know what this place was. I don't know how I wound up here, but I know I shouldn't have. It was not a place on any map. It was not a place that should be reached. Yet, it was there. It was a place even further detached from reality than all of those other unlocations I'd come upon before. Or maybe I was just too goddamn drunk. With that, I opened up beer number 10, settled back into my seat, and like clockwork, the tram's doors closed and we drove on. After only 10 minutes, we were back in the regular city. It was an instantaneous change, one I missed entirely. At one moment, I was staring at the same undescriptive plane outside, and then, suddenly, I was staring at buildings once more. I breathed a giant sigh of relief and finally began to drunkenly type this all out. It took way longer than usual, almost 2 hours, and by now, the morning's bustle has already begun. My head hurts, both from drinking and the noise of the people around me, but also from trying to understand what the hell I had seen last night. Either way, that's it for today. See you all tomorrow. I know there's more weird shit to come. The long ride continues, and I'm sure the weirdness does as well. I'm gonna try to catch some sleep now. Wish me luck, guys. Hey there, everyone. I officially made it through day 5 of the long ride. Quite a few things happened today, but while some of them were strange and terrifying, I also had a rather interesting conversation with a fellow passenger. Still trying to figure out what to make of that though. The morning started fantastic right off the bat. After I'd typed out the events of the previous night, I felt like utter shit. I was hungover, the tram was overcrowded, and the collective noise of all those people, it cut through my brain like a searing knife. Eventually, I just didn't care anymore. I pulled out one of the remaining 2 cans of beer my friend had gotten me, and I decided to down them, hoping they'd at least ease my hangover and allow me to sleep. Needless to say, people were not too happy about this. As I said, no one really cares to enforce the no drinking on the tram rule, but that didn't mean people were happy to see you drinking in the early morning hours. I opened my can of hangover cure beer, took a deep sip, and I could already feel the pain in my brain receding. I leaned back, took another deep breath, and then another sip. This behavior did not go unnoticed. Of course, I saw the stares, and I could almost hear the whispers. But really, I couldn't care less. I was just too damn exhausted. It wasn't long before I felt someone's hand resting on my shoulder. When I turned, I saw an older man. His attire screamed blue collar, and he was staring me down, waiting for me to take out my headphones. The moment I did, he spoke up.
Drinking first thing in the early morning, eh? Can't even be bothered to move the damn backpack to make room for other people.
I just looked up at him, and I was about to give him a swift "fuck you," but he wasn't the only one laying into me.
There are children here, you know? Can't you at least think about what an example you're setting for them?
An older woman chimed in.
How about you just move the bloody backpack and get up? Maybe standing for a bit might sober you up.
Mr. Blue Collar spat at me. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed a hold of my backpack and he was about to pull it off the seat. I was quick to hold it in place with my free hand. This time, I said out loud, "Fuck off, okay?" He didn't like me mouthing off one bit, and this time, he pulled on the backpack with all the force he could muster. The backpack slid off the seat, and I was promptly pulled off after it. In the process, I spilled a good part of my beer all over myself. I cursed aloud, only to be greeted by snickering and more whispers all around me. Already drunk at this time of day, I heard a middle-aged lady say. Probably homeless, slept on the tram. Someone else added, "Should just kick him off." I heard a teenager say to his friends, who enthusiastically agreed with his idea. "Fucking hell, all right," I finally said as I got up from my seat. I got a hold of my backpack and pushed myself through the more than annoyed crowd of passengers to find myself some room. As I did, it felt like the entire tram was staring at me. Occasionally, people moved out of my way, their disgust at my drunken self visible on their faces, while others were not shy to elbow me or push me aside, trying to provoke yet another scene. Eventually, I made it to a spot near the tram doors, and I pushed myself against the side of the tram and I began massaging my head. I still heard whispering, and I felt the odd glances. Yeah, you can all go fuck yourselves, I thought. Yet some were not just satisfied by mere whispers and glances. When the group of teenagers from before got off the tram, they all bumped into me. One of them so hard, I almost lost my footing. In an instant, I jerked around and pushed him. He tumbled off the tram and promptly crashed to the floor. He got up a second later, clearly about to throw a punch, but then froze. His eyes grew wide. Fear distorted his face, and he cringed back, just staring at me. He opened his mouth, but then closed it again. His friends all asked him why he didn't punch me, but he wasn't able to say anything. Now, I'm sure I look like shit, probably look like a homeless person, but that reaction, that fear, it wasn't normal. I don't know what he saw. Maybe it was me, or maybe it was something else, but it made me more than a bit anxious. I just stood there as the tram doors closed again. Could it be that whatever otherworldly influences I'd been subjected to had done something to me? Before I could think about it any longer, the same man from before was yelling at me again, telling me he'd have no problem kicking my drunk ass off the tram if I'd ever do anything like that again. Eventually, more and more people left the tram, Mr. Blue Collar among them. He gave me one last angry stare before he finally got off. As he did, I heard him mumble to himself about worthless scum. Soon enough, only a handful of people remained, and I could finally return to my trusty row of seats. I considered opening the last can of beer I'd left for myself, but I could tell the driver had it out for me because of the earlier commotion. Unless I wanted to get kicked off for real, I'd better lie low for a bit. So instead, I decided to just settle down, close my eyes, and get some sleep. I was awoken in the late afternoon by the sound of knocking against the tram window. I jerked up, turned, but I saw no one there. Great, I thought, probably a bunch of kids messing with me. And then I saw him. There was a guy who stood a couple of meters away, on the other side of the street. He was staring at me. His face, it showed a slight, cheeky smile, as if he'd just played a trick on me. And as if to make it even clearer, he made a little knocking motion. So, it had been him. But how? How had he been able to knock against the glass from over there? I mean, there was no way he could be fast enough to knock and cross back over the street. My eyes continued to the rest of him until the tram drove off. The moment it did, his smile grew a tad bit wider, and he raised his hand to wave at me. I don't know why, but he instantly creeped me out. The hell was wrong with that guy? I shook my head. No, don't think about it. It's probably just some idiot who saw me waking up and decided to mess with me. At least, that's what I told myself until we arrived at the next station. I had just been sitting there, staring outside, but the moment we pulled in, I noticed a person waving. At first, I thought it was someone waving at a friend or one of the other passengers, but then I recognized him. It was the same guy. The same freaking guy from the last station. How he'd gotten here, that was anyone's guess. He was still smiling happily, but now he seemed to have gotten a tad bit closer to the tram. By now, I should have gotten used to these strange events. I should have just ignored it. Hell, I should have just seen it as a normal part of my day. But I just couldn't. I don't know why, but him looking entirely normal, his smile non-threatening, it was so much worse than any of the ghastly grins I'd seen so far. I told myself once more to look away, to ignore him, to focus on my music. but I found myself again and again staring at him. Finally, we drove off, and once more, he waved at me, his eyes trailing after me. When we pulled into the next station, I somehow knew that he was going to be there. We were still a good 100 meters away, but I could already see him waiting for me. And as the tram pulled in, he waved at me again. Once more, he seemed to have gotten closer. I couldn't help but squirm in my seat. That freaking smile. Every time the tram pulled into a new station, that guy was there. And every time, he was doing the same thing, happily smiling and waving at me. I'd seen lots of weird shit, but this was just too damn bizarre. And then I did it. After more than a dozen stations, I just couldn't take it anymore. I raised my hand and I waved back at him, just to see if anything would happen, if anything would change. The moment I did, there was indeed a change. His hand went down, his eyes grew wide, his smile grew bigger, and then, after staring at me for another few seconds, he just left. A wave of fear like no other washed over me, and I just started shivering. I didn't know what I had just done, but I knew I'd made a mistake. A huge mistake. As I sat there, shaking in my seat, I couldn't help but stare outside, stare at the internal departure schedule to see when we'd pull into the next station. What if he was there again? What if he was waiting for me? Or hell, what if he tried to get on the tram and come for me? Just because I reacted to him, would he do this? Then the announcement of the next station was broadcast over the internal speaker by a friendly yet monotonous voice. I froze. There he was. At least, I thought so at first. But then I realized I was wrong. It was just another person, another man, just someone waiting for the tram. That waving guy wasn't there. Yet, as I sat in my seat, I knew this wasn't over. I knew he'd be back, eventually. Slowly, ever so slowly, afternoon turned to evening, Friday evening, which meant the tram would be absolutely packed the entire evening. I watched as teenagers and older people alike flooded into the tram. I saw guys dressed in suits, girls in short skirts and knee-highs, older ladies in classy dresses, and even a group of guys in sweatpants carrying 2 cases of beer. Almost the entire city was out to party tonight. The later it got, and the more alcohol people seemed to have consumed, the more excitable they became. There was a group of drunks bellowing a raunchy song through half the tram. Over there was a couple making out, and further ahead, I saw a group of girls so scarcely clad, you might think it was the middle of summer. I even saw 2 older gentlemen, costly dressed, who shared a bottle of disgustingly strong herb liquor between themselves. For hours, I watched the going-ons and the various people out tonight. To be honest, it was very interesting, and for the first time, I found myself ignoring the outside of the tram. Not looking for weird locations, but instead, just people watching. It must have been about 2 in the morning when the tram grew emptier that she entered. She was the most gorgeous woman I had ever seen, and my eyes grew wide. Her hazel eyes wandered over the tram in search of a seat, and I watched as she brushed aside a rebellious strand of brown hair that dangled in front of her face. For a second, all the noise in the tram died down, and everyone seemed to stare at her. Then, slowly, normalcy returned. Or at least, a sense of normalcy, for she was still at the center of attention. The strangest thing, however, was how plainly she was dressed. Instead of a fancy evening dress, she wore a pair of roughed-up jeans and a white tank top. But, to me, this just made her even more attractive. As her well-measured steps led her through the tram, I couldn't help but stare at her. I told myself to look away, to stop being so obvious. But I couldn't. This girl, whoever she was exactly my type. And then she noticed me. In an instant, I averted my eyes. Shit, I'm acting way too creepy. I did my best to just turn away and stare out the window. But then, only after a few moments, she was right there, standing next to my row of seats. "Hey there, is this seat available or is it reserved for your backpack?" she asked, giving me a hint of a smile. Oh my god, I can die happy. "Oh yeah, it is, I mean, it's reserved, not reserved. Available, I mean. Just let me get this out of your way." With that, I heaved the heavy backpack over to my side and with all the force I could muster, pushed it between my legs. It barely fit, and I was damn sure I'd just ruined a fair bit of the food still inside. But I didn't care. I'd have thrown the damn thing out the window if it meant having 5 minutes with this girl. She watched my efforts, slightly giggling, before she sat down next to me. "So, are you out to party?" she asked. Her voice was pure seduction, and the smile she gave made my blood rush through my veins. No, I'm..." Shit. What the hell do I tell her now? If I told her what I was really doing on the tram, she'd probably think I was the biggest freak on the planet. Which, honestly, wasn't too far from the truth. "No, I'm going somewhere," I eventually blurted out. She mused. "Why don't the two of us go somewhere together? To be honest, I'm really bored tonight. I'm looking for a bit of fun, you know?" After she said this, she gave me a little wink. Believe me, I wanted to. I really fucking wanted to. But I couldn't just give up like that, could I? Not on day 5. She then put a hand on my leg, caressing it slightly. "Why not take a chance for once?" At that moment, I was done. Fuck the long ride, fuck the tram, fuck Derek, who'd most likely call me out for giving up. I did not care anymore. The tram rumbled on, and then it came to a stop. At that moment, she got off her seat and held out her hand toward me. Without even thinking about it, I took it and got up myself. Yet, before I could leave my rows of seats behind, something unexpected happened. Some idiot who must have sat behind us and was on his way toward the tram doors as well, bumped right into her. Her hand was torn from mine and she stumbled a few steps forward. I was about to turn around and yell at him, but in that moment, something changed. She changed. For the shortest of moments, the beautiful girl in front of me wavered, for lack of a better word. In an instant, her brown hair and hazel eyes vanished, and something very much not human replaced her face, comprising of nothing but bone and scar tissue. I cringed back, almost toppled over my seat, and crashed hard against the tram's side. "Sorry about that," I heard from behind me, and when I turned, I saw a scruffy-looking older guy. When I turned back towards the girl, she was all hazel eyes and brown hair again. "Are you okay? Are you still coming?" she asked, but this time, the illusion was not complete. For a moment, her face was replaced by what I now recognized as some sort of beak, and the hand that she held out to me, it was nothing but a twisted set of claws. Once more, I pushed myself against the side of the tram. When she saw my reaction, her entire act fell apart. Her smile was gone. Her eyes had turned hard, and an expression of pure and utter anger came over her face. For a second, I thought this thing might throw itself at me. But then, she just walked off. I couldn't help but stare after her. After it. "I wouldn't look for too long. You might fall for it again," the scruffy guy said. "You care if I take a seat?" I measured him up for a moment, wondering if this was another trick, another ploy by some strange thing to get close to me. But when I saw no sign of ill will on his face, I nodded. "Thanks, I guess," I eventually said. The guy gave me a shrug. When he did, a rain of dandruff descended from his head, and I couldn't help but inch a tad bit away from him. Now that I had time to get a better look at him, I saw that he wasn't just scruffy, he was dirty. His clothes nothing but rags and smelled way worse than I did after 5 days on the damn tram. He had to be a hobo, I reasoned. He's probably on the tram for the night to catch some sleep in a warm place. "How did you know about this thing?" The guy chuckled at this question, but then he started to talk. When he did, I could smell disgustingly heavy liquor on his breath. "When you live where I do, you catch onto a thing or two. I've seen it before. Almost fell for it myself once." "What is it?" "Haven't got the slightest clue, mate, but sure is nothing good, I can tell you that." As I stared ahead, I saw that the woman had already found another guy and was seductively talking to him. A moment later, I watched as she pressed her mouth against his, and I couldn't help but shudder. "What is it you see?" the guy next to me asked. "What do you mean?" "That thing. What's it look like to you?" Brown hair, hazel eyes, wearing jeans and a tank top." The guy next to me laughed. "See, that's how it gets ya. Knows what type of woman we like, then it shows it to us." "What's she looking like to you then?" I asked, giving him a slight grin. "A blonde, with a pair of killer knockers." I burst out laughing when I heard this. I then watched as the woman got off her seat, the guy she'd sat with trailing after her. I was about to get up and do something, but for just a second, she shot me a threatening glance, one that made me freeze. A moment later, she dragged the guy from the tram. My eyes wandered towards the station, towards the two of them. The guy was still grinning like an idiot, enamored by what he assumed to be the girl of his dreams. As they went on their way, I could see their shadows, cast by a nearby streetlight. His was quite normal, but hers was entirely different. It was one of a giant, lurking thing, something akin to some sort of bird, a bird of prey. The image of a vulture appeared in my mind, A lurking, preying vulture, ready to devour its prey. Then, the tram drove off, leaving the two of them behind, and the guy to whatever fate this terrible creature had in mind for him. "So, what's your deal?" The guy ended the silence. "What do you mean?" "Been sitting here with no intention of getting out, carrying that bloody thing with you. You sure don't look like party people to me." Guess I really stuck out. In a few words, I told him about the long ride and that I was already on day 5. When he heard this, his face grew dark. "Doing a stupid thing like that," he mumbled, shaking his head. "Staying on here for so long, even overnight." "Aren't you doing the same thing? I mean, aren't you on here to catch some sleep?" "God, no. I might live on the streets, but not stupid. I'm just on here to get away from those damn party people. Can't sleep with all their shouting and whatnot. Stayed on here once, but it's not worth it. Not with all the crazy shit happening." "What do you mean?" He stared at me for a moment, probing me. "Surely you must have noticed them by now. Them people who just up and vanish. Strange things like that thing before, and those places that shouldn't be there but somehow are. Like this one." With that, he pointed outside, and I saw that we were just passing another location. This time, it was a scrapyard. It was a huge, constricted place, looking almost like a labyrinth. As I focused on it some more, I saw that its giant heaps comprised of nothing but old, rusted toys, all stacked up upon one another. I shuddered when I saw strange figures shuffling around between these heaps, figures that seemed as mechanical as the rest of the place. Eventually, I gave the guy a nod and I began telling him what I'd seen over the past days. When I told him about the waving man, he cut me off. "You did what?" he asked in shock. "Like I said, I waved back. Why?" "Damn it. Tell you what," he started, leaning over towards me, staring me deep in the eyes. "You better get off this bloody thing right here, right now." "Why? What's going to happen? What's he going to do?" "Ain't gonna do a damn thing. But now he knows you're on, and you've seen him. He's marked you. And now, others know as well." "What others?" "God knows what they are. Might be ghosts, might be demons, but they sure are trouble. As I said, you best call it quits. Call off your stupid bloody game and get off this thing." "Well, I wish I could do that. But to tell you the truth, I'm prepared to see this through." Once more, the guy shook his head. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. But I can see you've made up your mind." After he said this, he got off his seat. "Well, time to get going. I sure don't like taking my chances." I gave him a nod. "Well, thanks for the warning. Hold on. Here, for saving me." With that, I handed him my last can of beer. The guy's face lit up the moment he saw it. He almost tore it from my hands and it vanished into one of the many, many pockets of his jacket. "I'll say it once more. Get off this thing while you still can." He then made his way toward the tram doors, and once the tram came to a halt, he left it behind. Outside, I found him looking at me, giving me a well-meaning nod before he walked off. For the next hour, I sat in my seat, thinking. He said that I had been marked, but what exactly did that mean? I thought he was just some crazy hobo, but it was clear he knew what was going on here, and he knew more than I did. I cursed to myself for not having asked him to stay on longer and to share more information. Well, nothing I can do about it now. So instead, I typed out my experiences of day 5. It's close to 5 in the morning now, and I'm getting tired. I don't think it's a good idea to go to sleep though. At least, not until the sun comes up. That's it for now. See you all tomorrow. At least I hope so. Hello there everyone. Sorry for the lack of updates. After what happened on day 6, I just needed a few days to get myself together and get some well-needed rest. Things got out of hand, more so than any other day before, and I'm more than lucky to even be here writing about this. But more about that later. Let me start day 6 by telling you about my encounter with a familiar face. It was the old man who I'd met on day 2. This time, he wasted no time and sat down right next to me, right away.
Guess you're still on here then,
He said. Same as you. Guess we both enjoy riding the tram, I said half jokingly.
It's not all fun and games, young man, but I'm sure you know that by now, given how long you've been on.
I sure do, I said, laughing. The old man did not join in, but instead gave me an expectant stare. And so, I told him about my experiences over the course of the past few days. When I told him about the strange, undescriptive people in that weird station I'd encountered on day 4, his expression changed. It became one of sadness, of longing, but he didn't say anything. Eventually, I told him what had happened the day prior, about my encounter with the waving man, and what that homeless guy had told me.
That man's right indeed. You've stayed on here for far too long. As I told you, certain things might notice you, and now they have.
Once more, I felt a shiver running down my spine. I was in for it now, wasn't I?
You better stop this madness now, young man, and get off. It's not worth it.
Well, to be honest, I do want to. But this is day 6, and I told myself I was going to see this through. There's no way I can give up now. When the old man heard this, he just shook his head.
Let me repeat myself. It's not worth it. But I guess your mind's set. I hope you don't find to regret your choice.
With that, he got up from his seat, walked off and settled down in the tram car ahead of me. For a few more minutes, he just sat there. But the moment I took a glance outside, he was gone. The next couple of hours were rather quiet. It was Saturday afternoon and only a few people here and there entered the tram on their way to the inner city area. The moment we left it behind, I soon found myself all alone again. We had just made it to the outskirts of the city when the tram doors opened behind me, and I was greeted by loud yelling and laughter. A second later, a group of 6 kids rushed past me. They were so fast, they seemed like nothing but colourful blurs. They began causing a ruckus in the tramcar, then rushed back past me, giggling. I began rubbing my temples, and I was about to yell at them to knock it off, when one of them slapped me on the shoulder. "You're it," he called out, before he and his friends rushed past me again. I watched as they hurried to the tramcar ahead, and how they tried their best to hide themselves. I thought nothing of it, and couldn't help but sigh a bit when I saw one of them crawling below a set of seats and another trying to hide himself behind the ticket machine. Others, however, were doing strange things, impossible things, and I felt myself shivering in my seat. I watched as one of these kids almost folded himself into himself. He became smaller and smaller, while another one seemed to melt between 2 seats, vanishing. I sat there, closed my eyes, and then opened them again. By then, all 6 kids were gone, yet every once in a while, I could still hear the muffled giggling. I just sat there, trying my best to ignore it. This is just happening because I'm all alone on the tram. All those things, they only ever happen when I'm completely alone. Just wait till other people get back on. It'll all be over then. My thoughts were interrupted when I felt a hand on my shoulder.
"The children are waiting."
The hand's owner spoke from behind me. I froze. Without moving, I took a glance at the hand resting on my shoulder. It was old, wrinkled, and its fingers were far too long. Moments later, when the sun pushed itself from behind the clouds, I saw the shadow of whatever was standing behind me. It was a giant, monstrous shadow, one that seemed to spread over the entire tramcar, stretching further and further.
"Well, why are you not going?"
No, I'm just... I didn't get to finish my excuse. The creature's hand, it closed around my shoulder, and I felt its nails dig into my skin. I cringed in pain, but I kept my mouth shut. Don't scream. Don't move. Yet, with each passing moment, the creature squeezed harder, and I felt its nails dig deeper into my flesh. Finally, I saw the tram approaching the next station, and I could see a group of people waiting for it. When the tram came to a rest, I was finally released.
"Let's go, kids."
The thing behind me spoke aloud, and right away, all 6 kids reappeared, jumping out from behind seats and from places they couldn't possibly have been. For the first time, I could make out their faces, and I wish I had not. They were nothing but mockeries, estimations of children's faces that were only half right. What made it even worse, however, was that I somehow recognized them. In the deepest corners of my mind, I knew that I had seen them before. I couldn't help but shiver again as they raced past me. And then they were gone. When the tram moved again, driven by a strange sense of curiosity, I turned around. What I saw outside was a group of kids standing around something old, something who seemed to smile down at them. A second later, it turned towards me, and its eyes found mine. In an instant, its face changed. What had been a kind, smiling face before became nothing but an angry, twisted visage. My breath caught in my throat, and I jerked back around, more than happy to leave these ghastly children and their guardian behind. This, however, was not the only scary thing that happened during the day. As always, the same recurring passengers entered the tram. By now, they had long become an almost normal part of the long ride. Just another strange thing amongst a plethora of them. Yet, when my eyes followed one of them, an older woman, I noticed the change right away. She was not minding her own business like she usually did. That day, I found her frowning slightly, measuring me up, almost as if she was probing me. I remembered what that homeless dude had said. He's marked you, and now others know as well. I took a deep breath and I averted my eyes, trying my best to ignore her. But I could feel her continuing to stare at me until she got off the tram. Only a few stations later, she got on once again, and once more, she stared at me. I didn't look at her directly, only took a single, sideways glance, but I could have sworn her frown was getting deeper. This behavior was true for every single one of them, and like her, they too became angrier with me with each iteration. It made me feel restless and a tad bit anxious. I felt trapped, haunted by multiple pairs of eyes staring at me, and only me. When it became evening, the bustle of partygoers started again, and for the first time in hours, I felt myself slightly relaxing. Under the constant bustle of people entering and leaving the tram, finally, I began to feel somewhat hidden. And yet, I knew they were still there. I could still feel their glances, even amongst the general chaos that ruled over the tram. Finally, though, as the tram grew emptier once more, I found almost a dozen of them staring at me. It also seemed that, under the cover of the partygoers, they had gotten closer. By now, they were all in the same tramcar as me, and they seemed to have encircled me. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore, and I finally spoke up. "What the hell do you all want from me?" Yet nothing changed. I got no answer, and they just continued staring at me. Before long, however, much like that guy in the dark clothes that I encountered on day 3, they did not just sit in their seats anymore. They didn't just stare at me, but they were leaning forward, their faces distorted by unadulterated rage. Their hands were on their seats, their feet shuffled over the floor, as if in anticipation of something. The worst, however, was that with each station, more of them entered. If it's just one set of eyes staring at you, you can somewhat ignore it. You can handle it. But when it's more than a dozen sets of eyes, you just can't. With everything I'd heard, with all the warnings I'd received, I knew that something was going to happen. It just seemed that they were waiting for that something. In that instant, fear washed over me. Raw, hot fear that soon turned into panic. Finally, I decided that that was it. I wouldn't just stay on here until God knows what would happen to me. Fuck the long ride. Fuck the tram. This is over. I closed my hand around my backpack, was about to get up, but at that moment, their angry glances changed. They turned into smiles. Hungry smiles. The same feeling I'd had with that guy in the black clothes came over me once again. If I would get up now, they would come for me, wouldn't they? That's what they were waiting for, wasn't it? I just sat there, at my seat, my hand closed around my backpack strap, unable to move. Then the tram turned a corner, a bend that should not be there, and we encountered another unlocation. Half defeated, and knowing I was trapped either way, I plopped down in my seat again and stared outside, a feeling of miserable wonder coming over me. The entire area outside was covered in nothing but small buildings, shanties comprising of nothing but rubble and trash. They seemed to have been put up without rhyme or reason. They were almost growing from the ground, like mushrooms. Between them, I saw things moving around, twisted things that I could tell were not human. Yet it wasn't merely this shanty town that we'd arrived at. No, they were all part of another location. They were built around it, as if they were part of an infection that spread further and further. That dim red light that flooded the tram was enough, and one glance ahead told me that we were once more approaching Club Red. No, I thought, not this place again. I hoped that the tram would just pass it by, that we'd return to reality, that other people would enter the tram again, and I would be able to flee. Instead, the tram approached a wide, arching opening and then drove forward, straight into Club Red itself. What I saw in there was utterly surreal. All I'd seen on night 4 was the building's exterior, and it was nothing but a taste of the insanity this place contained. It was nothing short of a cesspool, an amalgamation of sin. All around us, the same strange, psychedelic non-music was blaring. I saw stalls everywhere. They were offering drinks, food, but also other things. In some of them, I thought I saw bound human beings, or things that might have once been human. In other places, I saw strange rituals, people praying to disgusting, twisted idols, and so much more. Even here, even inside, this place defied the laws of physics. The walls were covered in doorways, all connected by a mad network of stairs. But there were stairs that just shouldn't work, and yet they did. It was as if the works of MC Escher had become reality. A few moments later, this strange, fascinated trance that had come over me broke, and I jerked back as I remembered where I was and what was happening to me. While I had been staring outside, I had not given them any attention. It seemed all of these recurring passengers had inched closer towards me and were now surrounding me. I opened my mouth to throw them another set of insults, to tell them to stay the fuck away from me, when all of a sudden, the tram's doors opened. Instantly, the air filled with a disgustingly sweet odor, a stench so oppressive it almost made me cough. It smelled of strange spices, of bodily fluids, but also blood. Yet this wasn't the worst. I noticed something approaching the tram, and before I could even react, it entered the tram. Its limbs were bent at strange angles, as if they had too many joints with them. Its limbs sprouted from places they shouldn't. I watched as its head pushed itself forward, its neck stretching further and further as it scanned the interior of the tram. And then, one step at a time, this monstrosity made its way through the tram on its spidery limbs, slowly getting closer towards me. I just sat there, mouth open in shock, not able to do anything but stare ahead. No, it couldn't be. Why was this thing here? Why the hell was it back? Cold sweat broke out all over my body, and I just sat there, my hands holding onto the seat in front of me. Then I began to shake uncontrollably. Oh God, I thought, as I watched it getting closer. It's coming for me. This time, it's actually coming for me. By now, the people around me were all grinning. I understood now. This was what they had been waiting for. It seemed almost as if they weren't able to do anything. They weren't able to hurt me in any way. But this thing could. As I watched the twisted creature take another step, as it stalked forward in my direction on its spidery limbs, I just freaked out. I screamed in terror, jumped off my seat, and dashed for the tram doors. I didn't want to go out there. Hell, I shouldn't, but I wasn't in control of my body. It was nothing but pure, primal fear that drove what I was doing. But then the doors closed, right there in front of me. For a mad second, I clawed at them, tried to pry them open with sheer force, but before I could, the tram started to move again, trapping me inside. Fuck, what do I do? What do I do? Then, with no other option, I rushed to the back of the tram, praying that we'd return to reality, to my city, to another station that would allow me to get away. Outside, we left Club Red behind, but we continued on through the ever-extending shantytown. Shit, why are we not back yet? I sat in the back, huddled behind a seat, trying to keep the panic at bay. But one glance forward made that absolutely impossible. By now, this disgusting creature had almost reached the last tramcar, and for a moment, its eyes focused on me. Its jaw fell open, unhinged like that of a snake, and some distorted bout of guffawing laughter escaped from it. In that moment, I could not fight the panic anymore. I jumped up, my hand closing around one of the glass breakers, and then, with all the force I could muster, I swung it against the window. It crashed against the glass again and again, before finally, the window shattered. A moment later, I threw myself outside. I landed hard on the asphalt. My hands and knees exploded with pain. I felt the skin of my hands being scraped away, and I felt my knees crunch hard against the gravel. Then I felt myself being propelled forward, rolling over the street. I heard a horn. I heard brakes screeching, but I somehow avoided the oncoming car just by a hair's breadth. As I lay there on the ground, I was panting, in terrible pain. When I finally looked up, all was normal. There was no hint of any unlocations. Instead, I was on an entirely normal street, in my entirely normal city. By now, the driver of the car had jumped out, his face a mixture of anger and worry, and a moment later, the tram driver followed. While the car driver asked if I was okay, the tram driver, he began laying into me. He called me crazy for destroying the window and jumping off. He spat at me, accusing me of being drunk or high or insane. Instead of reacting to any of these words, I just stared back at the tram. It was empty. No one was inside. None of the recurring passengers. No twisted, spidery monsters. I could only listen as the tram driver explained to the other man what had happened. I had apparently jumped off my seat, screaming and freaking out before I broke a window and jumped off, even though I'd been entirely alone on the tram. I opened my mouth to tell them what had happened, but then I closed it again. What could I possibly even tell them? In the end, all I could do was drag my battered body to the sidewalk and sit down. By now, the tram driver had called the police and informed them about what I'd done. To be honest, I could have tried to run, to get away, but in the state I was in, it seemed very much impossible. As I sat there, I thought back to that old man, to the vision of his torn apart, broken body. If that car had hit me, something similar would have surely happened to me. Was this what this had all been about? Had all those people, those things, that creature, been nothing but visions to drive me over the edge, to get me to go crazy and end up being run over? When the police arrived, they were quick to take the statements of both drivers before they spoke to me as well. They took me to the station and questioned me for almost an hour. In the end, I told them that I'd had a panic attack, that I couldn't breathe, and I thought that I'd die of a heart attack unless I got off the tram. They were skeptical to say the least, and they subjected me to not only an alcohol but also a drug test. When both came out negative, I was essentially let off the hook. But not scot-free. They charged me with vandalism, and I'd have to pay for the tram window I'd destroyed, which came out at around $1,600. They also told me that I should consult professional help and see myself checked in. I mumbled a thanks, and I was eventually allowed to leave. And so, the long ride ended on day 6, in the early hours of the morning. What I'm now left with is nothing but a tale I can share only here, because you guys are the only people willing to believe any of the things I've seen. Thank you all for staying with me, for your thoughts on what happened, and for following me along on this crazy adventure. I'd have never thought things would get out of hand like this, and there are still so many questions I'll probably never have answers for. Yet, I'd also like to give you guys a word of warning, or reiterate those given to me multiple times. Don't do it. There are things out there, things who wait for people who linger, who stay in one place for too long. They are dangerous things, things that will find you and will come for you. And maybe, just maybe, you won't be as lucky as I was.